Yes, I think that we have heard very interesting presentations. They all gave a bit, understanding about what's happening in Finland and also in Nordic countries and in Europe overall. And then Finland seems to really be a good example where to study this kind of topic. So smaller cities, quite high extent of digitalization, and also, I guess, remote work as some maps showed, and also long tradition of second homes. I would just, point to one paper by Anne Marcuson in 1999. I also wrote the title to the chat box, which then already saw that big cities are not perhaps the best places to live nowadays. Of course, we can talk about what is big city or not, but still, she kind of used more or less same arguments. So it is more cheaper to live in small city, of course. It is good living environment. Smaller city may work well as a regional center, which has workplaces and services and so on. And they are more and more reachable in terms of transportation and mobility. So basically, she was talking about second-tier cities, which I guess more refers to the Jyväskylä and Tampere, I guess, but still, I think that COVID kind of provided us new perspective to look also far from the second-tier cities to the third or fourth or fifth-tier cities, to the smaller cities, which has most likely found again by the people. So I would just, like to start our discussions, if you would like to, with kind of, one overall discussion. We have seen that there are some interesting elements which are brought by the COVID, and we are not sure about whether people, are actually moving to the countryside or they just, it's temporary. But I would like to just start with the question: can multi-locationality offer response and help to change or relieve the trends towards urbanization, and also for smaller cities? I mean, like Keuru is or smaller cities. Do you see that multi-locationality is something we desire, or is there also some kind of aspects we want to avoid? So the benefits, but also the shortcomings about multi-locationality. We have talked a bit more about the benefits. And we started, yes, Mika.
Yeah, thank you. As I said and presented those results, and if we think about the urbanization process, what is right now is going on in most of the Western countries anyway, is already in a situation that this digitalization is going on quite rapidly. It's a systemic change, and it seems that this kind of urbanization is worsening, is coming again, but perhaps in a new way, using already planned area around the city areas, and in the same time there is also happening this urbanization process inside the core area. So there are many processes going on right now. This is the situation, at least in Finland, and I think it's quite common anyway in many places. The Nordic countries have has some kind of special situation because of these summer houses, of course. But how this kind of urbanization occur in Central Europe, where the prices of housing prices are much lower in the surrounding area of city areas. This is quite interesting how it happens. That could be quite good to discuss.
Yes. I would just ask from David, what do you think about this? Which direction it may lead us if there is more and more, multi-locationality?
I don't think you'll like my answer. My answer is I don't know, and I don't like to make predictions, which is kind of strange for somebody who just presented 3 scenarios for 2050. But that's exactly what they are. They're scenarios, they're sketches. We don't know how it's going to go, so we make some assumptions, and then just think about, if this were to happen, what should we do? And that's different than, let's say, making a prediction. One of the reasons why I'm adverse to making predictions is that we're often wrong. I remember in the 1990s, when we started with the internet, people were saying, it's the death of distance. People are not going to live in cities anymore because everyone's going to be everywhere. Well, that didn't happen. In fact, at some point, the opposite seemed to happen. People seemed to concentrate in cities because the face-to-face and the creative class and that sort of thing, which was also related to this technological development. After 9/11, people said, absolutely nobody's going to want to work in a high-rise anymore, so high-rises aren't going to get built. Well, that didn't happen either. And so we also have to be careful when we take something which is an extreme event like COVID, and then extend that over a very long period of time. And urban development is a very slow process. So it will have it's had huge impacts in the short term, probably maybe on the medium term, but on the long term, physically, I don't know. So I say, make some scenarios and think about what you would do if each scenario seems to be coming to fruition. What should you do then?
Take Miguel, yes, your question or your comment now.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. So yeah, I was just wondering, well, have a couple of things, but one related to this multi-locality or multi-locationality. You've mentioned, some of you, that of course this generates increased demand for some services in these second home locations, let's say. My question or my concern is that who should pay for this increased demand in services? I mean, multiple locations should mean that we should pay multiple taxes, or taxes in multiple locations as well. I mean, how, yeah, these municipalities, which are kind of attractive in terms of second homes, like how can they manage the increased necessity for financing these services? So it's like, yeah, just wonder, or kind of raise this concern on like who's gonna finance this increased demand for services in this type of locations. So that's yeah. Have another comment, but maybe I keep it for later.
Yes, I think that this is more a question to to Nora, but still I think we have also talked about the tax income and how we define first and second home, and I think
Exactly.
it's still in development in that sense. If you would like to answer, Nora, but still, yes, most likely for those who have leisure second home, their tax income doesn't come to the second home municipality.
Yeah, I can give a short comment. That's a good question, and that's also something I'm asking as a mayor, who is paying for the services? Because the tax income that we get is supposed to put in the services of the permanent residents. So what people need for when they come to their holiday houses, they might need some health services, social services. That's of course rare, but that could happen. And of course, we treat people like everybody else, and that's because it's only occasional. It doesn't matter. But if people are, because I have heard that people are interested in spending like half of the year in our town, and that's that long time that some services must be provided. So that's a good question. And then, as Mika said before, in Finland, is this discussion about could a person pay taxes in two towns? That's something really interesting. That could a person divide the taxation between different cities if they have second home? Of course, we need to remember that the holiday residents, they of course bring euros into our towns. They use the shops, they use services, they pay for things. So that also brings taxes in that way into our town. But yeah, the main question, if people want to spend more than weekend there, another there, if they spend half a year in our town, that's a good question, and it's something we really need to discuss more. And one thing what came into my mind when thinking, Ingmar asked about the negative sides of multi-locality. Something we need to take into account is the accessibility. So, for example, the good public transportation, railway connections, that's something that the state, the government of Finland has to also invest in, because municipalities, we are too small to build up a railway, for example, or have more trains going around. So that's something that we need to think if people start to move more and live in two places. Thanks.
Yes, maybe Mika can more say about governmental perspective here in Finland.
Yeah. Thank you for Nora about the answers. We have this social healthcare a new model. Financing model is coming now. We have these regional level financing systems that is just we are taking this now. So we have about 300 municipalities and about 20, or what it Nora perhaps remembers better, 21 these healthcare areas, let's say. So the healthcare financing is changing. So it's wider area right now. What are the taxes in municipality level in the future? There are real estate taxes, more and more important ones. So this is changing, but as we know, the legislation and the statistics will be the latest one, of, unfortunately, during this period of change. So, but this healthcare system change, I think it's quite good from this multi-locality point of view. There were actually a quite interesting podcast in this research where the one parliament member interview was made after this research, which I just presented, and he said quite clearly that because we have the municipalities or let's say municipalities municipalities differ quite a lot. There are quite large area municipalities in the same time when we have quite small ones. So it varies these municipalities quite a lot. Some cities are joined with the municipalities around and contains nowadays quite a large areas. And at the same time, we have very small ones, but also inside the urban areas. So it differs a lot. And in those municipalities that takes also urban and large rural areas, this kind of healthcare question is not so difficult because these municipalities have to produce it. But now these healthcare areas are financed by government, and that's the change what is right now going on. And I think this kind of changes we really need to handle this kind of multi-locality and the services and the taxation, because the one important thing is the democracy question and also the democratic question, who are the representatives and these kind of questions. It's not easy to handle multi-local way, let's say. You have some places where you can vote, let's say, and this is quite important thing.
Yes, and I think it's not only about those taxes local government receives when you're living there. Also, if you're teleworking, this company taxes maybe go to another big city. So I think it's in very interest of this local municipalities to kind of attract these people also to kind of pay more taxes at least. If I say so.
Actually, sorry to interrupt, but yeah, but this changed. These varies in between at least Nordic countries. In Finland, those company taxes, half of, or let's say, it delivers to the amount of workers to the municipalities where the company is and to the state. But as I know, in Sweden, all the company taxes goes to the government, and that's why the municipalities try to invite the people to live in us, and that's why these enterprises where they locate, it's not so important as in Finland because of this taxation system difference. So it differs, this kind of policy instrument.
Yes. Would anybody step in to our conversation? We have also some comments from Portugal and so on. I think we should still stick on Nordic countries more, as we have today talked about quite a lot about Nordic countries and Finland. Linda, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I can go back a little bit to this question about, is it good or bad? Is it happening or not? And I think all those things can potentially be true at the same time. I don't necessarily think that multi-locality or increased multi-locality is by its nature good or bad. It can have good outcomes and bad outcomes depending on how we respond to what's going on. So I think, as David mentions, these scenarios and the work that we're all doing right now can be quite important in terms of generating discussion about both the type of future that we might like to have, but also the type of policy actions that might enable that future both to happen and to unfold in a particular way. So I think if we think about, particularly from a sustainability perspective, the notion of everybody having more than one house and potentially traveling between those two houses could be negative from an environmental sustainability perspective if the correct infrastructure is not in place. And similarly with the suburbanization conversation, that depending on how built form is developed in the suburbs and how the connections are made between the suburban areas and the central areas, which we assume people will still need to go to from time to time, the sustainability outcomes can look quite different depending on how those developments are actually managed. So I think a really interesting question for me, and one that we hope to look more into in our case studies, is actually how are regional and local planners responding in this context where things are so uncertain, and how do we, so I guess so some people that I've spoken to already feel quite daunted by the task of making their regional strategic plan for 2040, when you have a sort of a trend that seems still very malleable. And I think that's a challenge, but at the same time, it's also an opportunity, because while something is malleable, you have an opportunity to shape it in a direction that can be more positive. So I don't know if that's useful perspective or not, but just to have in mind these three aspects of sustainability and how they interplay and the different trade-offs that might need to be made, it can very much have an influence on whether that answer to your question, is it a good thing or is it a bad thing, or is it going to happen or not? And one other side point that we have sort of uncovered in our study so far is that I believe work environment law is a quite important piece of the puzzle. So I can give you just like one small example from Sweden. The current work environment law states that if you are required, or if your avtal, if your like agreement with your employer states that you should work away from your office more than 50% of the time, then the employer is responsible for your work environment within your home. And I don't just mean giving you a screen and a keyboard. Actually, they're responsible for your well-being in that space. And I'm aware of at least one government agency in Sweden that has now made an arrangement with their staff that going forward, they are permitted to work from home 49.9% of the year. So this obviously, if you have a requirement to be in your office 51.1% of the time, this will make a difference to your mobility and where you might spend your time. So I think it's a very, very complex puzzle, but it's a fun one. So
yeah, thank you. You very good points, and certainly the environmental perspective. I just remember when we started to work remotely, then we actually have paid twice for the office, heating the office and for, staying at home. Dieter Müller, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much. Just a comment on the environmental side. I mean, even earlier, this SNES paper was cited, and I think we should be careful with these kind of oversimplifications about the impacts, because I mean people are somewhere at some stages, and so in a way, I mean whether this is environmentally sound or not sound is dependent what they would do with the money otherwise. Because the money is there, and it's the overall consumption that leaves an imprint and not the single parts. And I think this is something we should learn from sustainability thinking, that we should have the ambition at least to be global in our thinking. And that means also looking at the overall consumption and not picking out simple or single entities and then make a lot of statements on that. This is one thing. I think this is important. The other thing I think that I would like to mention in this context, I mean, is this. I mean, this entire discussion. I mean, we're discussing is as whether this phenomenon would be new. And I mean, I would argue it's not new. Actually, it has been ongoing all the time, but nobody has cared about it. And in Finland, there was certainly more care and appreciation of the phenomenon than, for example, in Sweden. But it was ongoing. And this discussion, I mean, I personally wrote already in 2004 a part to the to a Swedish governmental report on the countryside where we actually suggested a changed taxation system exactly for those reasons that we are discussing now, but they were never really appreciated. And I think this is also something that has to be highlighted, that I think a lot of the multi-locality issue, I mean, a lot of people are totally aware of that for various reasons, whether it's healthcare, whether it's tax incomes, or so whatsoever. I think in most countries, however, it's a politically very thorny issue, because what you would do is to relocate money from urban areas to countrysides. And countrysides do not have a political power in national parliamentary systems. And I think this is actually the big problem. And it's very much a problem about how we see population and people in general. I mean, where we are really coming from this idea of a fixity of people, and which was highly criticized within the mobility turn within the social sciences. And I think what is now happening is that administration is also kind of acknowledging that people are actually not fixed and pinpointed to an XY coordinate in a coordinate system, but they are mobile, and we should kind of depart from this idea that people are mobile rather than seeing them fixed into one place. Of course, this is administratively much easier to pinpoint people into one place, but if we should have statistics, then they should mirror what is actually ongoing and not in a way have the main goal of easing administrative practices. And a final thing I think is very important, and that is, I think, in terms of statistical practices. I mean, we have statistical bureaus in all countries, in all Nordic countries, that are collecting data. And to a certain extent, I think we should ask ourselves whether they are still collecting relevant data. Because they're collecting data in order to leverage taxes, actually, but not in order to nowadays. I mean, a system, we are talking about a mobile society for quite a number of years by now. And that is not really acknowledged in statistics. So for instance, I mean, some people were talking about telecommunication data, Telia data in the Nordic countries. I know for Sweden, for instance, they would charge you 40,000 euros a year for one county to get access to that. And for research, that makes it more or less impossible to access that kind of data. And you can wonder, I mean, whether this data actually should be open and should be gathered by public agencies rather than a private company. And so I think there are a lot of issues related to that really deserve a deeper kind of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I see that Mika has, yes, hand up.
Yes, thank you. I think there's one important thing that should take into account, that as last speech underlined, this is not a new phenomena, but the digitalization and changes in transport and energy and food systems are changing, and that's why I like to present this slide, what I normally present almost every time. It's a slide that explains the interaction between urban and rural, urban to urban, and peri-urbanization. It's quite an old one, but I will send it now, and perhaps you can see this. It's an old one from not so old, but 1991. Town and Country Planning Association present this Brainy and Rockwood, this interaction between urban and rural, and the policy instruments in the different part of the urban rural systems. So this is not an old system. This is not a new system, but how we handle this, and this self-sufficiency from the land use planning point of view is very important topic. So even in this kind of situation where we are right now, under COVID pandemic and under this kind of war, what we have this this kind of how societies, how communities could somehow prevent these possibilities to have a crisis, and that's why this self-sufficiency is more and more relevant question nowadays. And this kind of interaction between urban and rural phenomenon is part of the urbanization, and that's why this picture shows different kinds of policy instruments in different places in urban-rural context. So just to keep in mind about this kind of quite, let's say, logical, but some quite often it seems that it's important to remember this one.
Yes, thank you. I would like, I just see that the time is passing fast, and as I think I have just one question before we can think to end our discussions here today. I would just ask, from the kind of like a bit personal perspective, or gain, but also from the ESPON perspective, what kind of evidence is needed? For example, in Finland, ESPON can provide, or any kind of researcher can provide. Do you need any kind of specific evidence? Do you have seen any gap ESPON can try to solve? We haven't talked much about housing. Housing is not, typical ESPON topic, but still, do you have anything to kind of, address here? Yes.
Yeah, shortly. Remember this plural project, which I mentioned in my presentation. There was a quite good way of thinking, so that we recognize different kind of policy, land use policy, let's say, cultures in Europe. It differs a lot. It's a Scandinavian one, and then I remember it was Napoleonic and Anglo-Saxon and so on. So I think this ESPON could also analyze from that perspective the possibilities, because these kind of planning cultures are it differs, and there are reasons why they are these kind of things. So somehow varies about how to analyze this phenomena. I think it's one way to offer good results, let's say.